Yeah, so I'm going to present as sort of very early work. I'm developing a semester class of teaching students to half become research software engineers, half mathematical modelers. And I was told teaching them C++ while doing this is a bad idea. And so this is like a 2-day workshop bridge course to help me, but hopefully help a lot of you as well. So say that you want to onboard an intern or a recent graduate or a staff scientist with a data science background, so really good Python, R, or other language expertise to use Kokkos or another HPC, C++ library. We have great tutorials, but those do require some C++ knowledge. And if they don't have enough C++ to follow along, or if they've never even used a compiled language before, I still think they have enough knowledge of programming to where these aren't very big barriers. And so what you would do is you'd want to recommend some reading or like a short workshop they could attend to develop that proficiency. But many of us ourselves have developed this across many years in university classes and projects and suffer from a bit of expert blind spot. So I'm going to talk about the draft lesson plan and about how we can go about maturing it. And I think in general, also, I want to describe an approach where we could think about using the sort of workshop and instructor training format so that we can expand general HPSF project training capacity beyond core project developers and member organizations. So, so the approach here is what's called a Rosetta code approach. So some of the HPC tutorials already take this. This is not new, but what I think is good to adopt here. So there's a long list of concepts you can already adapt from Python and R knowledge, right? Variables and types, data structures, loops, functions, lambda functions, classes, debugger, profiling tools. We kind of want to keep this, to a minimal list if possible. I'd be really interested to know if there's something you really think we should add into this. You can also teach other really useful concepts sort of in the form of exercises, so you can sneak it in there without it being an explicit module. And I think we could kind of touch on packaging and build systems as part of exercises or unit tests or tuning performance. So they could do these while applying other concepts they've just learned. And then we can get onto the C++ specific stuff, so templates, and then going into detail about memory allocation. And I know that these are only 2 items here, but it doesn't reflect the amount of time you'd want to spend on these things, right? So it's sort of as relevant to support your projects. And I think lastly, you'd want to conclude the workshop, so try to map how these concepts you've just learned map onto subsequent training, if this is a workshop that you're placing before other workshops. And a point that facility administrators keep making to me is that you really do want to think about how to robustly try to mix C++ with other high-level languages already familiar to increase adoption. And I think there's probably a lot of work we could think to critically give some good suggestions. So as an example of the Rosetta code approach, here is doing loops, iterating over items in a loop between R, Python, and C++ to give you an idea. And lambda functions, I know these can be a barrier for using some of the HPC frameworks, but as you can see, syntactically, really the only thing you have to, whoops, did I lose my, okay. Syntactically is sort of passing by reference and, or by value. And so, so I think when you're trying to develop a workshop, you need to think about an in-person venue in which you can try to pilot this work. So ideally, and maybe the easiest is to have small group training, like a research group or department where you can kind of get feedback. Or you could do a pre-workshop. So if you're teaching your C++ framework, you could have an optional training for attendees who would like to opt in. HPC facilities can also try to have a language training. So I know Patrick Deal on Monday talked about various modules that he's trying to coordinate across the national labs. And it's kind of early for this, but maybe later on the line we could think about trying to run a shortened, maybe a day or half-day version of this at a conference site. And there's also opportunities where you could have a grant or need-based approach of trying to run these at specific sites where it would otherwise be difficult to have access to get domain scientists quickly acquainted with C++. And so this is just a screenshot or photograph from Patrick's presentation. And so you'll notice sort of like the items 3 to 4, build systems, modules, and SPAC kind of overlap with what we would want to know people working with C++. So there is some overlap here and like some opportunity for collaboration. So I think in-person workshops, super useful because like attendees typically are less distracted. You can get more questions from them. You can get informal feedback. So you can say, what went well or what can we improve on. You can see how long exercises take and whether people are genuinely challenged. You can find errors that they're making and think about whether or not those should be intentional and are there errors they can learn from, or is this something you should change the lesson for? And your TAs can also find pain points that either they won't be able to tell you or that you as an instructor standing in the front of the room wouldn't see. I think, Damien, you have a question?
Yeah, can you say what minute cards are?
Yeah, so minute cards are, I think I do have a link at the bottom. So it's an idea pioneered by the Carpentries Foundation. So typically, if a student needs help in the classroom, you would like raise your hand, right? But that's tiring. You can't type if you have a hand raised. So they use 2 different colored Post-its. So like red and a green, or I think there's a variant if you're colorblind also, but essentially, I need help, or I've done with an exercise, please continue. And so you have these Post-its, and then at the end, so let's say you're about to go into a break, like a coffee break, you take those red and green and you say something that went well or something that didn't. And then so then after they've left for the coffee, all the ETAs and instructors come around, we look quickly and look at those and think of what we can change immediately after the break. So if maybe a lot of people are getting stuck in a particular concept, you need to reinforce it, you can do that. So that's what the idea is, yeah. So what I'd suggest is when we're trying to develop these workshops, we should share these lesson materials. So there's a nonprofit organization called the Carpentries. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. So they have 159 lessons in development, but none of them are on C or C++. There is one compiled language for modern Fortran. So interestingly, there's one contributed lesson, not from the Chapel group, but from someone who uses it. So you can see there's sort of a lot of community interest in trying to work on these sort of HPC-oriented projects. So who are the Carpentries? So the Carpentries have existed for like 20 odd years. 2 minutes? Okay. And so it has its roots in Lawrence Livermore with Greg Wilson and Brent Gorda, but I don't want you to read the slide exhaustively. I just want you to see that they've had a lot of support over the years with the Sloan Foundation and NSF and NumFocus. So this is like a large organization with doing sort of valuable work in training research computing skills. These workshops are typically, there's 3 components. You're teaching the shell, version control, and a programming language. It's typically about 2 days. You'd probably want at least 2 instructors so that you're not losing your voice teaching over 2 days. It serves about 40 students. And ideally, you'd want a ratio of like 6 students to 1 TA. And so there's over 5,000 certified instructors currently. They're all volunteers. You just pay for them to travel to your site. And I think 2 highlights sort of outside of what was mentioned on Mondays, giving a tutorial talk, are typically you don't want to lecture for more than 10 minutes before diving into hands-on exercise. And also it's super important that the students, when they get stuck, they should dig themselves out of that hole. And that's kind of like a firm line that we do want people to experience the hands-on learning. A specific challenge to HPC is also trying to get compute resources to teach with. Hopefully, just teaching C++ on its own is sort of a lightweight exercise, but if you're hooking that into other activities, that's something to think about. So I strongly believe anyone can teach. We should, for this initiative, if we're doing this as the HPSF, we should think about people who traditionally do not teach. So like facility staff or users brand new to the project actually become, really ideal teachers. We like to recruit TAs who, attend these and try to help other people because they're kind of close enough and new enough that they can help and understand like the sort of learner view. So I would suggest like institutional membership with the Carpentries. To give you an idea of the cost, it costs about $1,000 to certify an instructor. these numbers are a few years old, but the certification doesn't expire. So if we do train someone, to be an excellent teacher and run these types of workshops, that's, they're part of the community and they can continue teaching. And as an instructor, you sort of avoid repeating yourself in helping people with sort of more trivial errors, and it looks good on your CV. So sort of in conclusion, many courses supporting HPSF projects, I think, can be community developed in this way, sort of like Chapel is. For this personal goal of teaching the C++ pilot, I'm hoping to find one other instructor from the audience, and it would be great if you could comment on the lesson plan. I'll show it again on a subsequent slide. And so, and lastly, I think we should maybe consider exploring institutional membership with the HPSF with the Carpentries, because this kind of ties into what Todd Gamblin said at the top of the conference, that we want to give project services to build community. And Elaine also mentioned that you build community by fostering the sense of belonging, these ongoing relationships and mutual learning. So.
All right, let's thank the speaker, please. And I think while Daniel is setting up, we can have one or maybe two questions. Do we have questions in the first place? Okay.
So one of the study groups in the C++ standards committee discusses education and how best to ensure C++ can be a teachable language. C++ is notoriously difficult to teach and difficult to learn. So I was wondering if you've ever interacted with some of those people or had any feedback or communication with them. I think that would be really interesting from the language perspective.
So I think typically when I was a grad student sysadmin, I would help people, but often the times it's over email. And so they would have a particular error, and then I would spend 6 hours in the debugger, and then I would just show, here are the debugging steps, explain what I did. So, sort of showing your work. But I don't feel like there's just a lot of precedent for teaching this in accelerated setting outside of the classroom. A lot of universities, they'll still spend a semester-long course teaching C, and then a semester-long course teaching C++, and we can't have that. We need to change that.